But this year we want to focus more on movements, and so we've invited Guna as our first speaker. Guna has been the leader of the Asia Pacific City to City. Guna has been a pastor, I believe, originally from Malaysia, and is now serving in he's living in Singapore, but his region for City to City, as you know, City to City was is a sister organization of City to City Redeemer Church started by Tim Keller. We've invited Mark Davison, who is also a City to City leader, and he was actually, I think, our first speaker 3 years ago. But and we've had multiple City to City speakers in the past. But now we get to hear from Guna, who is really the leader of the overall movement here in Asia and Asia Pacific. And so I'm going to turn over the time to him, and let's just welcome him.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I am just beyond what David has just mentioned, just a quick introduction about me. I was born in Malaysia, but moved to Singapore right after university and have lived in Singapore ever since. I'm a Singaporean and planted Agape Baptist Church and pastored it for 30 years in Singapore before I transited to my role in City to City uh, with Asia Pacific. So I think the slant, that Arise Asia is taking here is regards to not just church planting, but church planting as a movement. And I will be, so that's what I'm going to share probably in the next 25 minutes. But I think that a lot of what the practical things that you want to hear will probably come through your questions and answers. So please stay back behind for the questions and answers. I am going to share my slides with you. Are you able to see that? Yeah, it's there, right? Good. Thank you. Yeah. Um, yeah, so just give me a moment. Yeah, let me just pull this down. Yeah. Um, yeah, give me a moment, please. Yeah. In many Asian cities, you can feel the ground shifting under your feet, literally. A new mass transit line opens up, and whole neighborhoods get changed. A fresh wave of migrants arrive, and the language mix in the public places begin to shift. Housing costs continue to rise, work hours lengthen. The city grows faster than churches can manage. Uh, that's the reality. Yeah, and if the church does not multiply, it is the city that will shape people before the gospel reaches them. And so it's urgent that church planting multiplies in the city to keep up with the growth of the city. And the tension that we face like we as a city to city face as an urban church planting organization is primarily this. How does a church planting movement like ours keep pace with cities that are moving faster than our capacity? Well, City to City Asia Pacific has worked across uh, 29 countries. The ones that you see in red are the countries in which we have a work. And we all together, we have worked in a total of 236. This is last year's metrics. This probably has changed. Now it could be 280 over uh, uh, 280 over cities in which we have worked. But let me just zero in to one city this evening. Across city to city Asia Pacific, we are noticing the Asian cities are outrunning our planting pace. Yet the gospel of grace is not outrun when local leaders are trained in the hard language of their people and they plant gospel centered churches across denominations for the good of the whole city. Now, that's our vision. So our vision is to see gospel-centered churches planted and revitalized in the urban centers of Asia Pacific and to catalyze gospel movements in those cities. And Jakarta is just one example of that I'm going to share this evening. But it is a same pattern, whether it is Jakarta, the same pattern is in Seoul, in Tokyo, in Taipei, in Colombo, Kathmandu, different cities, different languages, but the same bottleneck and the same breakthroughs. And as we are, and we are not trying to plant any church, we are laboring for gospel-centered churches where grace drives repentance, joy, mission, and not moralism or legalism. Now, let me share with you how we learned this the hard way. And let me just zero in on the Jakarta story. In 2018, we helped plant our first church in Jakarta. It was an English-speaking church. The church grew. We were grateful. We were also quietly confident. We assumed growth would naturally lead to multiplication. But for the next couple of years, there was no further church planting in Jakarta or Indonesia. And here's why. We were training local leaders, but our training was not available in the local language, which is Bahasa. And that sentence is humbling. It means our work was accessible, but not truly transferable. It could gather people, but it could not release local leaders at scale. Now, we thought English access was enough, but it was not. That assumption slowed multiplication. So, in 2022, we ran our first church planting intensive in Bahasa. It took us a while to get there. We had to translate all our materials. We had to train our trainers in the language. We had to ensure there's proper contextualization. The nuances were all in translation, were all brought into relevance to the culture and to the people. And so we ran our first church planting intensive in Bahasa. Since then, we have run we have run one in Bahasa intensive per year. Sorry. So this is 2025, and then and as a result of that, we have helped plant a total of just a moment. I think I didn't show you this here, and this. As a result of that, we have helped plant about 30 churches just across the key Indonesian cities in just the last 3 years. Now, please hear that what that number is and what it is not. It's not a trophy. It is a sign that a bottleneck was removed. It is the difference between growth you can manage and multiplication that you cannot control. And this is where the story stops being only about Indonesia and starts being about how movements scale in Asia. Now, let me involve you for a moment, okay? Think of one or two words. What is the biggest bottleneck to church planting in your city right now? If I could just pause for 10 seconds and let you think about that. Think about what is the biggest bottleneck? If you think about church planting, what's the biggest bottleneck to church planting in your city right now? Now, it could be a number of things. It could be finances. It could be the lack of church planters, leaders, or training. It could be any of these things or many other things. Now, but behind many bottlenecks is one deeper question. Who owns the mission in the local culture, in the local language, among local leaders? Now, hold that for a moment in your mind. Let's zoom out with me to what we saw repeating across city to city Asia Pacific. Now, Jakarta is one of our first loud lessons, but it was not our last. We saw the same dynamic surface in multiple places, different contexts, same human reality. Since we embark uh, on, for example, on the Japanese church planting intensive, the moment we turn everything into the Japanese language, we have helped plant about 50 churches across Japan. And in Taiwan, since we turn everything into Taiwanese Chinese, we have helped plant about 20 churches because of the Chinese intensive. Now, the question for us is this. When training is only in a gateway language like English, three things happened. First of all, the movement grows around those who have access to that language. And it is usually the educated and the intentionally connected. Second, many local leaders remain consumers rather than owners, even when they are spiritually mature. They can attend, they can learn, but they cannot easily reproduce and train others. Third, church planting becomes dependent on outside energy. Outside trainers carry the vision. Outside funding sustains the work. Outside people solve problems. And that dependency is fragile. At first, it looks efficient, but over time, it becomes context blind. You miss social fault lines, shame dynamics, spiritual fears, and unspoken history. Then there is authority drifts. Decisions sit with the people least embedded in the consequences. And one day the outside energy weakens, travel slows, budget tightens, personnel change, and the movement does not only slow down, it wobbles because it was never fully owned from the inside by the locals. Local leaders know their city, they love their city, they understand the history, the culture, the context, and the way idols hide in normal life. But to train local leaders, we need training content in the local language, not as an add on, but as a core posture of humility. Now, let me name the convictions that has guarded us as City to City AP, because without convictions, language and collaborations just become mere techniques. But before I name our convictions, let me say why church planting in cities matters so much. This is a whole module that we run at our church planting intensive, but let me just briefly say why church planting in cities matters so much. Cities are not only big people, they are influential. They concentrate people, industries, universities, media, policy. You want to go to the best schools, you go to the city. You want to go to the best hospitals, you go to the university. You want the best entertainment, you go to the city. Cities shape culture for whole nations. They also magnify human need, loneliness, injustice, spiritual confusion, economic pressure, sit side by side. And if gospel centered churches are thin on the ground, whole communities never see a living witness of grace. But if gospel centered churches are planted across neighborhoods and networks, the gospel becomes visible, not only proclaimed, it becomes visible. It takes root in families, workplaces, and the public square. Now, let me come back to our convictions. We have three convictions. Let me run that by for you. The convictions that guided us. The first is that only the gospel transforms. It's not methods, it's not strategies, it's not programs. Now, why does gospel matter here? Because when you feel you are falling behind, you start reaching out for other fuel. You stop motivating by grace and start motivating by fear. Fear of wasting money, fear of losing credibility, fear of being exposed as slow or ineffective. And fear produces the same fruits. It produces pressure. It produces hurry. It produces control. Pressure can create activity, but it cannot create renewal. Pressure can produce compliance, but it cannot create joy. And in the long run, pressure does not multiply gospel-centered churches. It multiplies tired leaders, hidden sin, fragile communities. But the gospel does the opposite. If you're already accepted in Christ, you can repent without collapse. You can build slowly without feeling shame. You can release control without panic. Grace is not an enemy of urgency. Grace is what keeps urgency human. The second conviction that we have is that God's ordinary strategy is the local church, true local leaders. Movements that bypass local leadership eventually drift into fragile dependency. At first, it can look efficient. Outside trainers carry the load, outside structures hold the center. But over time, local leaders wait for permission instead of taking responsibility. The work becomes context blind, authority drifts, and when the outside energy changes, the work wobbles. This is not only pragmatic, it is theological. The Spirit gives the body locally. The church is not imported, it is born. And the third conviction is that the gospel moves incarnationally. Jesus did not save from a distance, he came near. He entered our world, he spoke our language. And at Pentecost, God did not demand one sacred language, he honored many languages. And that is not a detail, it's a window into God's heart. So those are the convictions. Now, what did we actually do in rhythm and practices that prove life-giving and fruitful? I'll keep this concrete. There are three rhythms. Let me go to the first one here. Local language training as a pipeline and as not an event. First, local language training becomes a pipeline. Translation is not just words, it's concepts, it's tone, it's cultural application, and the questions leaders are afraid to ask aloud. So we treated language work as leadership development. We built teams, translators, trainers, contextualizers. And the second rhythm is that a planter pipeline with a bias towards younger planters. And we tend to recruit church planters who are under 40. And you may ask the question, why? The simple reason is that younger leaders are more willing to take risk. They're more agile in fast-changing cities. They're closer to the cultural heartbeat. They also have a longer runway to plant, to suffer, to learn, and to mentor the next generation. But we are careful here. This is not age worship. We need older leaders for character, for wisdom, stability, and governance. And in many places, older leaders in our ecosystem become coaches. Younger planters often become the pioneers. And the goal was never city to city did a training. The goal was local leaders now have a shared framework, shared vocabulary, and a shared confidence to plant and train others. The third rhythm is cross-denominational collaboration around the gospel. Collaboration can become sentimental, political, or shallow. We at City to City AP collaborate around gospel essentials, church planting competence, and shared love for the city. We don't collaborate around branding, not around control, not around denominational distinctives. We gather people around the gospel with a love for the city and with a desire to plant churches. So that leads us to some discernment, what we hold firmly and what we adapt as we grew. Two things that I'll share here. One, What we hold firmly is that we hold firmly to gospel-centered theology and gospel-centered culture. Uh, uh, we honor grace-driven repentance, not shame-driven compliance. A church that forms disciples, not just a platform that collects attenders. Leadership that is accountable, not hype and untouchable. We also hold firm to the local church as a primary unit of planting and sending. And what we adapt is that we adapt methods and strategies and languages, and we keep asking one diagnostic question. Is this adaptation and contextualization helping the gospel land more deeply in this culture and in this language, so that it will help us learn and to continue to make the gospel relevant to that particular culture and to the particular language? That just leads me to the next thing that I want to talk about, the two pitfalls that kept showing up in our midst, that we continually have to deal with. And one of them is rigidity, where sometimes there's a tendency to export one working successful model everywhere, and we discover that it doesn't work. The way you plant a church in Phnom Penh is going to be different from the way you plant a church in Ho Chi Minh City. And even in, let's say, Vietnam, a church planting models will differ in Ho Chi Minh City and in Hanoi because historically they're different, and they just have different challenges. Number two, the second pitfall that we continually face is trend chasing, where adapting so much that where we contextualize so much or adapt so much that the church becomes a mirror of the culture and not a challenge to it. We call this over contextualization, and we want to be very careful that we don't under contextualize or over contextualize. The gospel gives you a spine, actually, and a flexibility at the same time. It humbles you so that you can adapt, and it anchors you so that you do not compromise. Now, let me speak about some of our failures, because God does some of his best work in our weaknesses. I think we all know that. And our failures are not mainly a lack of activity. We have a lot of activity. There are some blind spots here. We underestimated how much our default system favored those with access. That was our main problem. We have access to a particular language. We overestimated how quickly ownership would transfer without hard language training. And so I'll name this as our temptations, and they are three temptations behind these blind spots, because they are really only strategic, they are actually spiritual. The first one is actually control. When the stakes are high, you start believing you must hold the steering wheel tightly or everything will start drifting. And so the organization or the management can become the bottleneck. Now, sometimes we tend to call it stewardship, but underneath it's actually our fear that we are losing control. And we had to learn to give up control so that when people start work in the local language, that it will take on a life of its own in the different cities with the different languages. The second thing is convenience. It's easy to have training in just one language. It is not convenient to translate. Translation is costly. Contextualization is slow. Developing local trainers takes patience. So we reach for what is already available. We already have it in English. Let's just do it in the gateway language, and then we quietly normalize who gets access. So people who cannot speak the language then cannot get access to the training. So we have to keep away from this temptation. The third is speed. We all have this temptation that we want results very quickly so that we can report results, metrics, numbers that we can defend, momentum that we can show. Speed is not always sinful, but impatience often is. And impatience sacrifices depth for pace. And when that goes first, the movement eventually pays the price in burnout, in moralism, in fragmentation. And we had to be careful about that. Now, let me land this with a question you might not ask, but I think that the Lord keeps pressing on us. Here, this is my final point, and here's the unasked question. What kind of movement are we building? We ask ourselves continuously, and the answer is simple. One that locals can attend, or one that locals can own. Do we want to build a movement where the locals can just attend, like in a seminar, and then go away, or where the locals can really own it themselves? Now, if you build only in a gateway language, you may gather faster, but you will root shallower. Whole neighborhoods and whole spheres will remain untouched. Jesus is the true church planter. He entered our world. He bore our sin, including our pride, our control, our fear of falling behind. He rose to create a new people. So we can plant without desperation. We can collaborate without insecurity. We can translate without resentment. We can equip local leaders without needing to be the hero, because Jesus is the true church planter. And because the gospel does not merely spread people, it takes on local flesh through local leaders for the life of the whole city. So for a movement in church planting to scale and to gain momentum, we need to consider the local language, local people, local culture, contextualize and allow the gospel to take root deeply in the church planter, in the church he plants, and in the city in which he lives. Thank you.